I learned early that a person can be cornered without looking cornered, which is why I still wore ironed shirts, still opened my small lunch cafe in Yeonam-dong at 7 every morning, and still smiled when customers told me the perilla oil noodles tasted like something their mothers would have approved of, even while the debt collectors across the street pretended to read newspapers with their shoes pointed at my door. My name is Lee Seo. I was 29 then, an Omega, and my life had the tidy appearance of a well-plated meal. Warm lights, white bowls, handwritten menus, a row of pickled radish jars glowing amber on the shelf, and a younger sister at university who believed I was far more competent than I had ever been. People like to call me calm. That was generous. Calm is a lake. I was more like soup kept at a low simmer so it would not boil over in front of customers. My cafe had belonged to my aunt before she moved to Jeju for her lungs, though belonging is a romantic word for a lease, a bank loan, and a kitchen extractor that sounded like an old man clearing his throat. I made simple food, the kind that did not photograph dramatically, but made people close their eyes for a second after the first bite. Soy braised beef over rice, mushroom juk in winter, cold noodles in summer, yuzu tea for people who wanted sweetness without admitting they were tired. I liked feeding people because food told the truth gently. Hungry people were not abstract. They sat down, held spoons, and became human in front of you. I had built my days around that. I woke before dawn, checked the stock, argued with the vegetable vendor over sesame leaves, texted my sister Jian to ask if she had eaten, ignored my landlord when he sent redevelopment rumors with smiley faces, and pretended not to see the men from Myeongjin Finance until they began coming inside. My father had signed for a friend's loan when I was 19 because he was the sort of beta man who believed trust should be returned before it was questioned. The friend vanished, my father got sick, and debt, being a creature with excellent memory, stayed. When my father died, the papers multiplied. My mother had already passed years before, so it was just me and Jian, a girl with quick eyes, a scholarship, and the terrifying habit of assuming I could fix anything because I had fixed everything she had seen break. For a while I managed. I worked, borrowed, refinanced, sold my father's old taxi license, smiled at bank clerks, made kimchi until midnight, and stretched money so thin it became transparent. Then Myeongjin Finance bought the debt, and the collectors stopped sounding like creditors and began sounding like men who knew my sister's class schedule. That was the month my best friend, Park Min-jun, walked into the cafe after closing with a torn lip, a designer jacket over his shoulder, and the expression of a man about to ask for forgiveness before explaining why he deserved none. Min-jun was a beta, 29 like me, a former culinary school classmate turned bartender at a private lounge in Gangnam, where he served whiskey to men who called themselves investors when they were in good moods and hyenas when they were not. "Do not be angry," he said, which immediately made anger stand up and put on shoes. I set down the dish towel. "Why is your lip bleeding?" "Because Kim Seung-hwan does not enjoy being told his apology tastes watered down." "You met him again?" "Briefly." "Min-jun, I know." His on and off alpha boyfriend, Seung-hwan, was a club promoter who loved apologies, dramatic reunions, and borrowing money during moments of intimacy. Min-jun knew all this. Knowledge had not yet taught him escape. He touched his lip and winced. "This is not about him. I have a job for you." "I have a job." "One night, a private charity auction. You attend as someone's fake boyfriend. You stand beside him, smile, leave. 20 million won." I stared at him, then laughed once because the alternative was worse. "Did the punch damage your sense of reality?" Seo-yun. "No. You do not know who." "A man who pays 20 million, one for a fake boyfriend, is not someone I need to know." Kwon Tae. The name made the kitchen colder. Kwon Tae was not famous in the way actors were famous, or politicians, though his photograph occasionally appeared in business pages beside words like restructuring, logistics, port security, and private equity. He was the eldest grandson of Kwon Il-jae, the old chairman of Kwon Tae Holdings, a conglomerate whose respectable companies moved cargo, built luxury apartments, managed hotels, and sponsored cultural foundations. Everyone in Seoul with ears also knew Kwon Tae carried a darker body underneath, an organization with roots in smuggling, protection, gambling, and the kind of influence that made police reports lose weight before reaching prosecutors. Tae was 34, an alpha, heir apparent, cold as cut glass according to Min Jun's lounge gossip, and dangerous in a way that did not require photographs of guns. "Absolutely not," I said. 20 million. Still no. He needs someone tonight because his cousin is trying to force an engagement announcement with an Omega from the Seo family. Tae needs to arrive with an established lover to make refusal less humiliating for everyone. How thoughtful of organized crime to protect feelings. He wanted someone discreet, not an actor, not someone connected to his family, someone believable enough to be seen with him and forgettable enough not to sell the story. And you thought of me? I thought of someone with manners, a clean public record, a pretty face when he stops glaring, and debt collectors across the street. I picked up the towel again, twisted it, then put it down before I strangled either of us. You told him about the debt? No details. I said you needed money. I'm sorry. He looked it. That did not help. Need entered the room and sat at the counter as if it had ordered tea. 20 million would not erase everything, but it would pay Jian's dorm fees, buy time with Myongjin, replace the refrigerator that groaned every night like it resented being alive. More importantly, if Kwon Tae knew my problem, perhaps Kwon Tae could keep worse men from making use of it. That thought frightened me because it sounded like the beginning of a trap, and traps are most persuasive when shaped like relief. One night, I said, no private rooms, no alcohol pressure, no touching beyond public manners. I get paid before I go home. I will tell them. And if he speaks to me like rented furniture, I leave. Min Jun smiled weakly. You never behave like rented furniture. That is part of your charm. My charm is on unpaid leave. 3 hours later, I was in the back of a black sedan wearing my best charcoal suit, hair brushed back, blockers carefully applied, a burner phone in my pocket, and the calm, hollow feeling I got before difficult conversations with creditors. You have been seeing Mr. Kwon for 4 months, she said without preamble. You met through Mr. Park's lounge when you catered a private tasting. You are not engaged. You are private by temperament. You call him Tae-o Asi in public, Tae-o in private if heard by family. Do not discuss your sister, your debt, or your cafe's finances. If asked personal questions, answer lightly and allow him to redirect. Was there a class for this, or are we improvising aristocratic fraud? Her mouth twitched. You are more composed than the previous candidate. What happened to him? He asked whether there would be cameras in the bathrooms. A practical man. She looked at me properly then. Mr. Lee, tonight is performance, but the people attending are not harmless. Stay within sight of Mr. Kwon or me. Do not accept drinks from anyone else. Do not leave through service corridors alone. That sounds less like fake dating and more like entering a tiger enclosure with a boutonniere. That is not an inaccurate metaphor. We arrived at a hotel in Hanam with glass doors, a red carpet no one had the humility to be embarrassed by, and security men arranged so naturally around the entrance they seemed planted. Kwon Tae stood beneath the awning speaking to an older man whose smile kept dying halfway across his face. Tae was taller than I expected, dressed in a black suit with no unnecessary shine, his hair dark and neatly parted, his face severe enough that handsome felt like an inadequate and slightly frivolous word. His alpha scent was heavily suppressed, but a trace slipped through the damp evening air. Cedar smoke, cold stone, and roasted barley tea left too long on the stove. He turned before Attorney Han said my name. His gaze touched me once, completely, not lingering where other alphas sometimes lingered when they saw an omega and mistook designation for invitation. He looked like a man reading a contract he expected to enforce. "Lee Seo Yun Si," he said. His voice was low, even, and professionally impossible to misinterpret. "Thank you for coming. I was told there would be payment." Attorney Han looked briefly at the sky, perhaps asking it to swallow her. Taeo's expression did not change, but the air around his eyes shifted. "There will be." "Then thank me after the transfer clears." "Reasonable." That was not the answer I expected. He held out his arm. "May I?" I appreciated the question enough to resent it. "For public manners." "For public manners," he agreed. I placed my hand on his sleeve. We entered a ballroom glittering with chandeliers, flowers, and people who had never had to calculate bus fare before buying onions. Taeo moved through them with the calm of a knife being carried point down. He did not charm, he acknowledged. Men approached, lowered their voices, received one or two sentences from him, and left either satisfied or carefully pretending to be. Women assessed me with curiosity sharpened into etiquette. Omegas from old families looked at my suit, my shoes, the ringless hand resting near Taeo's sleeve, and decided I was temporary. They were not wrong. That was the problem. "You are quiet," Taeo said, while an assemblyman nearby laughed too loudly at something not funny. "I was told to be discreet. Not invisible. That costs extra." His gaze flicked to me. "Does it?" "Everything does." For a moment I thought he might smile. He did not, but the possibility of it passed near enough to disturb the weather. The Seo family approached after the speeches. Chairman Seo was broad, silver-haired, and smiling with the exhausted aggression of a man denied something he had already counted as his. Beside him stood Seo Jun-hee, a beautiful omega in a cream suit, expression composed, eyes unhappy in a way I recognized at once. He was being offered like a gift no one had asked whether he wanted to be. "Taeo-ah," Chairman Seo said too warmly. "You brought a companion." Taeo's hand settled at the small of my back. Light, visible, removable. "I brought my boyfriend." The word should have been nothing. It was part of the lie, paid for by the hour, dressed in public necessity. Still, hearing it in his calm voice made my skin attend. Chairman Seo's gaze moved over me. "Lee Seo Yun Si, was it? From a café?" "Yes." "How grounded." "Rich people say grounded when they mean low," I smiled. "Food has that effect when done properly." Junhee's mouth tightened, not with contempt. Suppressed amusement, perhaps. Chairman Seo continued probing with family questions, school questions, future questions. Taeo answered before any became sharp enough to cut. "Seo-yun values privacy. Seo-yun has his own work. Seo-yun is not part of this negotiation." Each sentence placed me outside their reach. I told myself it was strategic. He needed me untouchable, because the performance required it. When Chairman Seo finally retreated, Junhee met my eyes for 1 second. Gratitude and apology passed there, quick as a match flame. I wondered how many of us in that ballroom were being used by older men who called it protection. Later, on a balcony where rain silvered the railing, Taeo handed me a glass of water he had taken from a sealed bottle himself. "You handled him well," he said. "I have dealt with landlords. Chairmen are only landlords with better shoes. That is inaccurate, but useful. Was the engagement stopped? For tonight. Temporary victory. Most are. He looked out over Seoul, where the city lights blurred in the rain. The side of his face, freed from the ballroom's chandelier glow, looked more tired than cold. You should be careful for a few days. Because Chairman Seo is offended? Because men who are offended by losing leverage often look for softer targets. I am the softer target. Yes, I disliked the honesty and respected it at the same time. Then, the 20 million was underpriced. I will increase it. That was a joke. It was also true. I turned to him. Do you solve everything by adding money? No. What else? Pressure, information, timing. Comforting list. Comfort is rarely efficient. Maybe that's why powerful people are always miserable. His gaze settled on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped the balcony roof. Inside, applause rose and faded. Are you miserable? I asked, because apparently self-preservation had stepped out for air. No, he said. Then, after a pause, I am occupied. That is not the same as living. No. His answer was too quiet to be performance. I looked away first. At the end of the night, the payment cleared before I reached the car. I checked the account twice, not because I distrusted numbers, but because relief can feel like a scam until repeated. Tae saw me looking and said nothing. That restraint was the first thing about him I found dangerous in a personal way. The second came when the sedan stopped outside my building. Across the narrow street, one of Myongjin's men stood under a pharmacy sign, smoking. He saw the car, saw Tae through the tinted window, and dropped the cigarette without finishing it. Tae noticed. Of course he noticed. Who is that? He asked. A man with poor lung discipline. Seo Yun. He said my name the way a locked door might say key. I exhaled. Debt collector? Not tonight's problem. How much? That is not your business. It became my business when he watched my car deliver you. No, you rented me for an evening. You did not purchase my problems. His jaw shifted slightly. Go inside. Lock the door. Attorney Han will contact you tomorrow. About what? Making sure tonight does not damage your life. That sounds expensive. Often. I should have refused further contact. I should have taken the money, paid what I could, and returned to the familiar dignity of slow drowning. Instead, I climbed the stairs to my apartment above the café and stood in the dark kitchen while my phone buzzed with a message from Min Jun. Alive? I wrote back, unfortunately charismatic under duress. He replied, him or you? I did not answer. The next morning, Attorney Han arrived before opening with 2 security men who remained across the street and pretended to enjoy vending machine coffee. She brought documents, not a marriage contract yet, a protection and confidentiality agreement, temporary, 3 weeks. Kwon Tae would settle the immediate Myongjin threat by purchasing and discharging the debt through legal channels. In exchange, I would appear at 2 additional events as Tae's boyfriend until the succession meeting passed and Seo pressure cooled. My café lease would be reviewed for redevelopment risk. My sister's name would be removed from any collection records. This is too much for a fake boyfriend, I said. Attorney Han folded her hands. Mr. Kwon dislikes loose ends. I am not a loose end. No. You are the person standing near one. I read everything. I changed clauses. I insisted that Jian's university not be contacted except through a neutral scholarship office, if absolutely necessary, that my cafe remain open without visible guards unless threat escalated, that Min Jun be cleared as a visitor because he was already guilty enough, and I refused to let him become a suspect in his own apology tour. Attorney Han accepted most revisions with professional annoyance. Teo arrived halfway through, not announced, simply present at the cafe door while I was arguing over the phrase reasonable cooperation. He looked strange in my cafe, too tall and dark-suited among wooden tables, steam-clouded windows, and jars of pickled garlic. "You open at 7, he said. "I do. Customers arrive at 7:30. Men with contracts arrive whenever they want, apparently." He looked at Attorney Han. "Did we interrupt preparation?" "Yes," I said before she could answer. "The radish does not slice itself." He removed his coat. "Where is the knife?" Attorney Han stared at him. I stared harder. "You want to slice radish? You said it needed slicing. That was a complaint, not a job posting." "I can follow instructions." "Can you?" "In limited contexts." That was how Kwon Tae, heir to a criminal empire and man feared by debt collectors across Seoul, spent 15 minutes slicing mu radish at my counter with the grave precision of a surgeon. He was not fast, but he was careful. The slices were slightly too thick. I told him so. "Noted," he said. "Do you take criticism from everyone?" "No." "Why me?" He placed another uneven slice on the pile. "You are holding the sharper knife." Attorney Han covered a smile with her coffee. "I signed the temporary agreement after my breakfast rush." By evening, Myung-jin's men vanished from the street. The debt was cleared by the end of the week. I told Jian a foundation error had corrected an old loan issue. She cried on the phone and called me an idiot for sounding calm, then asked if I had eaten. Younger sisters are ruthless when they love you. The 2 additional events became 4. 4 became a month. Chairman Seo did not calm. He probed. Taeyo's uncle, Kwon Tae, began using the rumors of my low status to argue Tae was unstable, influenced by an inappropriate omega, unfit to inherit the old family council's loyalty. Kwon Il-jae, the grandfather, responded by demanding proof of stability. Not romance. Stability. The word wealthy criminals use when love is inconvenient and contracts are available. The marriage proposal came 6 weeks after the charity auction in Attorney Han's office under lights so neutral they made everyone look like evidence. 1 year, she said. Legal registration, residence in Mr. Kwon's Hanam home, public appearances as required, full discharge of all remaining debts tied to your father, purchase of the cafe building to prevent redevelopment eviction, medical insurance trust for your sister if needed, tuition support disguised through an existing scholarship foundation, and monthly compensation. I looked at Teo. He stood near the window, hands behind his back, face unreadable. From fake boyfriend to fake husband, efficient escalation. "I apologize," he said. "For which part?" "All of it." That was inconvenient. I preferred powerful men unapologetic. It made refusal cleaner. "Why me?" "Because the family already believes you matter. Replacing you would signal weakness. Keeping you as a boyfriend is too easy for them to dismiss. Marriage satisfies my grandfather's condition and cuts off Seo's alliance attempt. And for me? Your cafe becomes yours. Your sister becomes untouchable. No collector can use your father's name again. You make it sound like a gift. It is a bargain. At least you are honest. I am not offering romance. Good. I don't have time for romance. Lunch service starts at 11. Attorney Han gave me the contract. It was long, careful, and less insulting than I expected. Separate bedrooms, no sexual obligation, no bonding, no reproductive clauses. I crossed out a vague inheritance phrase anyway, and Teo signed the margin without comment. 1 year minimum, extendable only by mutual agreement. Divorce at the end with assets preserved. I keep working. I control my suppressants and medical decisions. My sister is not to be informed of mafia-adjacent truths unless safety requires it, and I approve. Minjun can visit after clearance. My cafe staff, 2 aunties and a part-time student, are not to be intimidated by security. My recipes remain mine, a clause Attorney Han looked at as if it had crawled out of the sink. "Recipes?" she asked. "People steal stranger things." Teo said, "Include it." I brought my own lawyer, a tired woman from a small civil firm who read the contract twice, glared at everyone, and told me privately that if I was determined to commit aristocratic fraud for survival, this was at least unusually well-drafted fraud. I signed 3 days later. Teo signed after me. His hand was steady. Mine was too, because years of chopping vegetables had taught me to keep fingers safe when blades were present. We registered the marriage at a district office on a rainy Tuesday. The clerk congratulated us with the cheerful emptiness of someone who had already stamped 5 unions and 1 divorce petition that morning. Teo asked before placing his hand at my waist for the required photo. I said yes. The warmth of his palm through my suit reminded my body of its omega instincts, which I had spent years treating like badly timed visitors. I ignored them. "You look severe," I murmured before the camera flashed. "This is my neutral face." "How comforting for enemies." "I have other faces." "Do you?" The camera flashed. In the photo I was smiling faintly, and Teo, to my surprise, looked less cold than watchful. Moving into his house was harder than signing. Inside, everything was elegant enough to make ordinary living feel like trespassing. A housekeeper named Mrs. Na showed me my suite, the adjoining sitting room, the kitchen, the garden terrace, the security panel, and a small office I could use for cafe accounts. She was a beta in her 60s with bright eyes and the authority of someone who had known Teo since before he became a rumor. "You may rearrange anything in your rooms," she said. "What about the rest?" "Please rearrange some of it. This house has been waiting for an argument." I liked her at once. My belongings looked humble against the room. Cookbooks, sweaters, a chipped Celadon bowl my father had bought at a market, a framed photo of Jian at her high school graduation, the old brass spoon my mother had used for tasting broth, and a small jar of cafe sea salt because I did not trust rich houses to season properly. Teo stood at the threshold, not entering. "Is the room acceptable?" "It is beautiful." "That is not the same." I looked at the blank bed, the silent lamps, the table without one scratch or receipt. "It needs evidence that a person lives here." "What evidence?" "A laundry chair, a book left face down, a cup someone means to wash later and lies to himself about. Something ugly given by a friend." "Mrs. Na can arrange—" "Ugly gifts cannot be arranged by staff. They have to arrive through emotional damage." His gaze rested on me. "I will remember. Please don't purchase emotional damage." "I will try not to." Our first weeks as fake husbands were a study in controlled collision. Teo liked schedules. I liked rhythms. He woke at 5, exercised, drank black coffee, reviewed reports, and spoke in short sentences to men who sounded afraid even through closed doors. I woke at 6, made tea, checked supplier messages, and argued with him about whether 2 guards outside my cafe looked like a threat to customers. We compromised. 1 guard at the hardware shop across the street, 1 pretending to fix the alley light, and Ma Jun-sik, Teo's security chief, allowed to enter only during delivery hours and only if he carried crates like a useful person. Ma was a broad alpha with a scar across one eyebrow and the surprisingly gentle habit of labeling pantry shelves when stressed. My cafe aunties adopted him within a week and fed him soup until he looked haunted by gratitude. At home, Teo kept rooms cool. I raised thermostats. He placed documents in exact piles. I left market receipts in a bowl by the entrance until the bowl became a formal institution. He had staff who cleared dishes instantly. I started washing my own mug, partly from habit and partly because I disliked feeling like a guest inside my own contract. Mrs. Na watched this silent rebellion for 2 days, then placed a sponge shaped like a duck beside the sink. "For your mug," she said. Teo saw the duck and stared at it. "It has eyes." "Most ducks do." "It is watching me." "Perhaps it disapproves of your coffee." He looked at the duck again. 2 days later, I found it moved closer to the espresso machine, facing outward like a small yellow guard. I refused to smile where anyone could see. Public appearances required a different kind of discipline. Teo's world was full of men who shook hands like signing threats and women whose politeness could remove skin. I learned names, alliances, old grudges, and which compliments were traps. I stood beside Teo at foundation dinners, hotel openings, gallery events, and one memorial service where 3 men cried convincingly for someone they had despised. He introduced me as my husband without emphasis, which somehow made the word heavier. In public, his hand at my back was precise, neither intimate nor distant. He never touched without checking my posture first. If I shifted away, his hand fell. If I leaned in, it stayed. That small attention, repeated, became one of the first stones in the wall I built against him and then foolishly used as evidence to remove the wall. His grandfather, Kwon Tae, examined me over dinner like an old scholar reading an unfashionable text. "A cook," he said. "A café owner," I replied. "I cook because food should not be left unsupervised." The old man's mouth curved. "And you think you can supervise my grandson?" "No, I barely supervise my kimchi." Taeyo's uncle snorted. Taeyo's hand stilled beside his water glass. Kwon Il-jae laughed once, a dry sound like paper tearing. "Good. Men who are too easily supervised are useless. And men who think they cannot be are exhausting," I said before sense could intervene. Silence fell. Teo looked at me with something close to warning and something closer to amusement buried beneath. The old man laughed again, longer this time. After dinner in the car, Teo said, "You realize he likes you now?" That sounded like a diagnosis. It can be. "Your family is very tiring." "Yes." "How do you survive them?" He looked out the window. "By giving them very little to hold." That answer stayed with me longer than it should have. The slow accumulation began with food, because of course it did. Teo did not eat properly when busy. He treated meals as interruptions to be scheduled between calls, like elevator maintenance. I found this personally offensive. At first I left food because wasted soup irritates me. Then because Mrs. Na worried. Then because he came home after midnight one evening with rain in his hair, a cut on his knuckle, and no dinner in his body, and I became too angry to maintain emotional bookkeeping. "Sit," I said from the kitchen doorway. He looked at me, then at the bowl of beef radish soup on the table. "I have work." "Your work can watch you eat." Seo Yun. Your ancestors did not survive war, famine, and colonization for you to die from executive malnutrition beside a laptop. Mrs. Na, passing through the hallway, made a sound and disappeared. Teo sat. I served rice, soup, kimchi, and seaweed stems. He ate quietly. Halfway through, he said, "This tastes like the soup my mother made." I kept my eyes on the side dishes. "Is that good?" "Yes." "Then say that next time. Comparing dead mothers is advanced conversation." He stopped. "How did you know?" "You speak of your grandfather, uncle, father's companies, never your parents. People omit where it hurts." His spoon rested in the bowl. For a moment I thought I had gone too far. Then he said, "She died when I was 12. My father, 3 years later." "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." That is not a cure. He looked at me then, and something unguarded moved in his eyes before the shutters came down. No, he said, it is not. After that, he began appearing in the kitchen when I cooked, not hovering exactly. Tae did nothing as harmless as hover. He stood nearby with a tablet and pretended to read while noticing everything. How I toasted sesame seeds until they smelled nutty, how I rinsed rice 3 times, how I tasted broth with my mother's brass spoon and frowned before adding salt. One morning, after I mentioned that the cafe's new supplier sent pale cucumbers, a crate of excellent cucumbers arrived at both the cafe and the house with no note. Your procurement department is interfering with my vegetables, I said that evening. The cucumbers were inadequate. You did not eat them. You described them with contempt. I describe many things with contempt. Are you replacing your uncle? His eyes lifted from his papers. Tempting. That was almost a joke. I am told practice helps. His practice became dangerous, not because he became warm in any obvious way. He did not. Tae remained composed, terse, and professionally terrifying. But small things shifted around me. The cafe's broken back door was repaired by a locksmith who refused payment because the invoice was handled. A new freezer appeared after the old one finally died with a sound like a resentful ghost. Tae claimed it was a security upgrade because spoiled food could create vulnerabilities. The house stocked the cheap honey crackers Jian liked after she visited once and ate half a pack while trying to appear sophisticated. My room acquired a laundry chair, then a quilt with warm rust and blue squares, then a ridiculous ceramic tiger Min-jun gave me after deciding rich houses needed ugly courage. Tae placed the tiger on the sitting room shelf rather than hiding it. When I asked why, he said, "It seemed committed to existing." I laughed for a full minute. He watched me as if laughter were a weather event he wanted to understand but refused to chase. Min-jun's life, meanwhile, continued to parallel mine in the least convenient ways. Seung-hwan returned with flowers, then apologies, then a promise to enter rehab for gambling, then a request for money phrased as temporary support. Min-jun came to my cafe after closing and sat on the floor behind the counter, knees to chest, looking younger than 29 and far more tired. "I know what you'll say," he said. "Say it for me then." Love should not require receipts. Good. But I miss him. Also true. And I hate that missing him feels like evidence that I should go back. I sat beside him. The kitchen tiles were cold through my trousers. "Missing someone is not a court order." He laughed weakly. "You sound like you've been arguing with feelings professionally." "I married a mafia heir. I have become a specialist." He leaned his head on my shoulder. "Do you like him?" "He is considerate in unsettling ways." "That is not no." "He is dangerous." Also not no. "He signed a contract because he needed a public Omega husband. I signed because I needed money and protection. Feeling anything inside that arrangement is like seasoning soup while the kitchen is on fire." Min-jun turned his head. "And yet you would still season the soup." "Obviously. Bad soup helps no one." He laughed, really laughed, and I let myself be pleased. Later, when Tae came to pick me up because the alley light was out and Ma had reported unusual loitering, he found Min-jun asleep at a table. Tae took off his coat and draped it over him without comment. "He will get makeup on that," I whispered. "It will clean." "Your suits live adventurous lives now." "So I have noticed." The first visible crack in Tae's control came not from romance but from illness. Jian fainted during midterms. The university clinic called me because her emergency contact was still my number, and I ran out of the cafe with flour on my sleeve and fear turning the city too bright. By the time I reached the hospital, Tae was already there. He had been across town in a meeting with shipping executives. Somehow he arrived first, arranged a private consultation without making Ji-an feel purchased, and stood in the hallway holding her backpack, which had a cartoon frog keychain swinging from the zipper. The sight of Kwon Tae, cold heir of Kwon Tae, holding my sister's ridiculous frog backpack with solemn competence nearly broke something in me. "You came," I said. "Ma called." "You were in a meeting." I left. "You didn't have to." He looked at me. "I know." Ji-an was fine, exhausted and underfed and furious at herself. Tae entered her room after asking me, bowed politely, and endured my sister's suspicious inspection with remarkable stillness. "Are you the reason Oppa suddenly stopped looking like he was calculating rice by grain?" she asked. "Ji-an." Tae answered, "Partly." "Are you good to him?" "I am trying to be." She narrowed her eyes. "Trying is what people say before failing." "Then I will try carefully." Ji-an looked at me. "He's strange." "Yes, but his face is useful." "Please, stop talking." She ate the porridge he had ordered from the hospital cafeteria and later fell asleep. In the hallway, I rubbed both hands over my face. Tae stood beside me without touching. "Her scholarship will cover reduced work hours if she needs to stop her part-time job," he said. "No." "Seo Yun?" "No. Ask me before fixing things." He went still. "I apologize. You cannot put padding around everyone I love before I decide whether the floor is mine." I wanted to reduce strain. "I know. That is why I'm not angrier." He looked through the window at Ji-an sleeping, her frog backpack by the chair. "Then may I ask?" The question disarmed me. "Ask what?" "Whether I can have Attorney Han look into scholarship options that do not name me, do not require your sister's gratitude, and are offered equally to several students in her program, so she is not singled out." I hated how much he had learned from one correction. "Yes," I said. "You may ask Attorney Han to look." "Thank you." Do not sound so relieved. I may still reject everything. I assumed. On the drive home, I realized my anger had not come from his help. It came from the fact that part of me trusted him to help well if guided. Trust is more frightening than suspicion because suspicion keeps you outside the door. Trust asks what you might do if invited in. Summer deepened. The house changed by increments. Tae began coming home earlier on nights I cooked, though he claimed schedules had shifted. He learned to wash rice, badly at first, then with the focused improvement of a man who disliked incompetence in any field. He stood beside me at the stove, sleeves rolled, reading recipes I had written in shorthand and asking questions that made me revise my own habits. Why add garlic now? Because my mother did. That is not a technical answer. It is the oldest technical answer. He accepted this. One night, after burning scallion pancakes on one side, he looked genuinely offended by the pan. "It is unevenly heated," he said. "The pan is fine. You are impatient." I am efficient. Burnt efficiency. The center cooked. You sound like men who call broken buildings redevelopment. He turned the pancake over, considered the blackened side, and said, "We can serve it downward." I laughed so hard I had to hold the counter. Tae looked at me, and this time he smiled. Not much, a brief, quiet shift gone quickly. But it was there, and because it was there, I had to look away and pretend the sink required urgent attention. Interior conflict became my least favorite daily task. I could manage invoices, prep lists, staff schedules, my sister's stubbornness, Minjun's relapses into hope, and Taeyo's security briefings, but I could not easily manage the small, stubborn animal of feeling that had begun curling up in my chest whenever I heard his car arrive. I reminded myself of the facts. The marriage was contractual. He had needed legitimacy. I had needed rescue from debt. His care might be guilt, responsibility, habit, strategy, alpha territoriality dressed in manners. The title everyone whispered behind our backs was not wrong. I had been his fake boyfriend, then his fake husband, and sometimes he acted like I belonged to him. But the more I watched, the more complicated that word became. Belonged in his public world meant claimed, guarded, displayed, used as evidence. Belonged in the quiet rooms of the house began meaning something else. My mug belonged on the second shelf because I could reach it. My receipts belonged in the entrance bowl because I emptied pockets there. Minjun belonged at our dinner table even when his eyes were swollen from crying. Jian belonged on the sofa with textbooks and stolen crackers. Mrs. Na belonged in every conversation because she already knew the answer. Professor, the neighborhood cat who eventually followed me from the café to the car and adopted the garden, belonged wherever he shed orange hair. Tae did not say these things. He made space, and the space itself spoke. The turn came in September, on a night when rain hit the city hard enough to blur the river. Tae's grandfather summoned us to the old family house in Pyeongchang-dong for dinner. Kwon Il-jae's health had worsened, but his eyes remained sharp, and the succession council hovered near him like crows arguing over a tree not yet fallen. The dinner was tense. Tae's uncle smiled too much. Someone mentioned my cafe's humble beginnings. Someone else asked whether I planned to retire into family duties once Tae inherited. My kimchi ferments without regard for inheritance, I said. I must remain involved. Kwon Il-jae laughed. The uncle did not. After dinner, the old man asked to speak to me alone in his study. Tae refused immediately. No. The room cooled. Kwon Il-jae looked amused. Your husband has a tongue. And judgment, Tae said. I touched his sleeve. The door stays open. He looked at me, conflict visible only because I had learned where to look. The stillness around his mouth, the fractional delay before breathing. Ma will stand outside. Good. In the study, with the door open and Ma visible in the hall, Kwon Il-jae poured tea with hands that trembled only when the cup was nearly full. My grandson is becoming inconvenient, he said. Most people are, up close. He was not. I said nothing. Old men with power often expect silence to behave like furniture. Mine did not. He opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box. Inside lay a bundle of recipe cards tied with faded thread. The handwriting was round, hurried, warm. His mother's, the old man said. My chest tightened despite myself. Why show me? Because he has begun coming home to eat. I looked at him. That is your evidence? For him, yes. He touched the cards with one thin finger. After she died, he stopped tasting food, ate what was necessary, refused anything made from her recipes. When his father died, he stopped sitting at the table unless ordered. A boy who learns hunger can be ignored becomes a man difficult to bargain with. That sounds like admiration. It was useful. That sounds worse. His eyes sharpened. Then he smiled. You dislike useful cruelty. Most people would, if they were not busy benefiting from it. He laughed softly. She made beef radish soup, too much pepper. He said yours tasted like hers. I thought of that night in the kitchen, the spoon resting in his bowl, the old pain moving under his voice. Did he tell you? Mrs. Na. Mrs. Na is terrifying. She has survived this family longer than most blood relatives. He held the box toward me. Take them. Why? Because he will not ask. I did not touch it. And what do you want in return? The old man's smile thinned. Keep him human enough to inherit without becoming his uncle. Not so soft that he dies. Not so hard that everyone else does. I am not a leash. No, he studied me. Perhaps a table. That is the strangest compliment I've received. Tables make men sit. I took the box because the cards were his mother's, not because the old man asked. When I stepped into the hall, Tae saw it. His face changed so quickly most people would have missed it. I did not. All color seemed to retreat from beneath his skin. Where did you get that? His voice was quiet. Too quiet. Your grandfather. Give it to me. The command snapped through the hall. Ma's shoulders shifted. I closed my fingers around the box. Ask. Tae froze as if I had struck him. Then the anger in his face cracked, and underneath was something much younger than him. Fear, grief, shame at needing anything in front of that house. Please, he said. I handed him the box. His fingers closed around it with such care that I knew he wanted to crush something else. We left immediately. In the car, he did not speak. At home, he went to the kitchen, placed the box on the counter, and stood over it like a man facing a grave. I waited by the door. You can go, he said. I know. Then go. No. His head turned. The cold was back, but cracked at the edges. Do not confuse contract with permission to intrude. That hurt because it was designed to. I let it land, examined it, and answered from the place in me that knew wounded animals bite near the bone. Do not confuse pain with authority. His jaw tightened. Seo Yoon. I am not your grandfather. I am not your uncle. I am not trying to make you useful. Silence. Rain moved against the windows. Mrs. Na appeared at the far end of the hall, saw us, and vanished with the wisdom of a general. Tae looked at the box. She wrote these while she was dying, he said finally. For me, she said, so I would not forget how things tasted. I threw them across the room after the funeral. My grandfather kept them. He should have given them to you. He keeps everything until it becomes leverage. Then don't let him have this. He laughed once without humor. You speak as if wanting is easy. No, I speak as if refusing to want has not made you safe. That did it. Not loudly. His face did not crumple. Tae had trained too long for collapse. But something in him stopped holding the line. He pulled out one card with unsteady fingers. Beef radish soup, written in round hangul. Extra pepper if Tae refuses to say he is cold. Under it, a note. He eats better when he thinks no one is watching. I looked away because witness can become theft if taken greedily. His breath caught once. That was all. One sound in a kitchen too beautiful for grief. I moved closer, slowly. May I? He did not ask what. He knew. After a long moment, he nodded. I stood beside him, not touching, and read the card only after he angled it toward me. We can make it, I said. Not tonight. No, not tonight. Maybe never. Then we keep the card safe. He looked at me. Why? Because someone loved you in measurements. The words left my mouth before I could improve them. Tae's eyes shone, though no tears fell. I do not know how to receive that. Most recipes require practice. The corner of his mouth trembled. Almost a smile, almost grief, all human. That was the moment I saw him clearly enough to lose the safety of not knowing. Not the heir, not the cold alpha, not the man who had paid for my performance and rearranged my life. A boy who had been fed love, then starved himself so no one could take food away again. After that, our pretense thinned until even silence could see through it. We did not confess immediately. Real change is rarely courteous enough to follow a schedule. We made soup a week later. He sliced radish unevenly, as he had at my café, and I pretended not to notice until he said, "Too thick?" Historically consistent. He added pepper with such concentration that I had to touch his wrist to stop him from turning the pot into punishment. We ate at the kitchen table. He took one spoonful, then another. His face remained composed, but his hand under the table found the edge of my sleeve and rested there like a question he had not formed. I let it. Later he began telling me small things, that his mother sang trot songs off-key when she cooked, that his father had loved her but considered tenderness dangerous after she died, that his uncle taught him at 16 how to make men afraid before they knew what they feared, that he learned control because every visible desire became a bargaining chip. I listened. Sometimes I asked questions. Sometimes I made tea. Sometimes I told him his family had mistaken emotional constipation for discipline. The first time he laughed at that, fully enough for sound to fill the room, Mrs. Na dropped a spoon in the hallway and blamed the cat. Min-jun, too, began choosing differently. After Seung-hwan used his name to borrow money from a lounge regular, Min-jun finally filed a police report, changed his locks, and came to stay at our house for 3 nights because his apartment no longer felt like his. Tae cleared it with security without making Min-jun feel like a problem. On the second night, Min-jun sat across from him at the kitchen table, eyes red, and said, "Why do we keep loving people who teach us to apologize for bleeding?" Tae, who had been reviewing a document, set it down. "Because pain becomes familiar before it becomes intolerable." Min-jun stared. That was disturbingly helpful. "I apologize." "Don't. I'm going to write it on a napkin and pretend I thought of it." Watching them, I understood that Tae's coldness had never been emptiness. It was feeling stored under lock, and once he chose to open a drawer, what came out was not softness exactly, but precision aimed toward care. He arranged for Min-jun to meet a lawyer, but only after asking if he wanted legal options. He did not threaten Seung-hwan aloud, though Ma looked unusually cheerful for 2 days, so I chose not to ask. He let Min-jun cook breakfast badly in our kitchen because doing something with his hands kept him from texting his ex. When Min-jun burned eggs, Tae ate them without complaint. "You don't have to," I whispered. "He needs them consumed." That is either kindness or a crime against cuisine. Both. Autumn moved toward winter. Publicly, the marriage became accepted fact. Kwon Il-jae transferred more authority to Tae, slowly, grudgingly, testing him with family politics and old violence disguised as loyalty. Tae began cutting off parts of the organization that profited from predatory lending. It cost him. His uncle raged. Men disappeared from meeting tables and reappeared running legitimate warehouses in places where they could do less harm, which Tae described as reassignment, and I described as morally suspicious logistics. He did not become clean. I did not ask him to pretend he could, but he became more deliberate about what dirt he would carry and what he would refuse to pass on. When I asked whether this was because of me, he said, "Partly. Mostly because you made it difficult to lie to myself in peace." "I am talented." "Yes." The confrontation came in December, after the succession vote, after Tae had effectively won, after our 1-year contract had only 3 months left, and I had begun looking at apartments above the café with a pain I refused to name. Attorney Han sent a reminder about exit planning. I read it at the café during afternoon lull and felt the floor tilt. Everything promised to me had been delivered. The café building had been purchased through the neutral company and would transfer to me at year's end regardless of divorce. Jian's scholarship was secure. My father's debts were gone. I could leave with my life not only intact but safer than before. That had been the point. Freedom should have felt like a clean room. Instead, it felt like standing in my old kitchen after closing, hearing no car arrive, no low voice ask if I had eaten, no ridiculous duck sponge waiting by the sink. I hated that, not because love is shameful, but because I could not bear the possibility that my heart had learned gratitude and mistaken it for choosing. So I did what sensible cowards do. I became practical. I packed some clothes to move gradually back above the café. I told Mrs. Na I needed to prepare for the transition. I told Teo through calendar invitations and neutral sentences. He accepted each one with a face so controlled it made my chest ache. For 2 weeks we lived politely inside an oncoming absence. Then Jian, bless and curse her, asked at dinner, "Are you two divorcing because the contract ended or because you're both emotionally stupid?" I nearly dropped my spoon. Teo looked at her. Possibly both. Jian nodded. At least you know. After she left, the house was unbearable. I went to the sitting room and found Teo standing by the shelf where the ugly ceramic tiger sat beside his mother's recipe box. "Your sister is direct," he said. "It's a family illness." "Is she wrong?" I folded my arms. "About which diagnosis?" "Emotional stupidity." I wanted to laugh. It came out thin. "Probably not." He turned to face me. No suit jacket, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, still composed but less armored. "I have had Attorney Han prepare amended documents." The words struck like cold water. "Of course you have. The cafe transfer will complete next week. The scholarship fund is irrevocable. Your compensation remains yours. Security continues for 6 months after separation or until you dismiss it. There will be no contest if you file for divorce." I stared at him. "You are giving me exit papers." "Yes." "Before we have an emotional conversation." "Yes." "That is very you." His mouth tightened. "If I speak first, anything I say may become pressure. I will not put you back in a contract just because I learned too late that I want what it pretended to give me." There it was, clean, devastating, infuriatingly honorable. "You want?" I asked. "Yes." "Say it." His gaze held mine. "I want you to stay." The sentence was quiet, stripped of command. "Not because of money, not because of protection, not because others believe you belong to me. I want you to stay because this house has your receipts in the bowl, your salt in the kitchen, your friend asleep on the sofa, your sister stealing crackers, your laughter in rooms that were built to echo. I want to come home to food I am not required to earn, and criticism I did not solicit but need. I want to be known by you, though it frightens me. I want to know you without making knowledge another form of control. I want to be your husband when no one is watching." He stopped, breathing controlled by force. "And if you leave, I will make it safe. I will not punish you for being free." I sat down because standing had become too theatrical. My hands shook, so I pressed them between my knees. "You should have said this earlier." "Yes." "I should have too." His eyes changed. "Seo Yun." "No, let me finish before I regain intelligence." I looked at the duck sponge near the kitchen sink, visible through the open doorway, at the tiger, the recipe box, the ridiculous life we had made while insisting it was temporary. I am afraid that if I stay, people will say you bought me and I settled comfortably into being owned. I'm afraid they will not be entirely wrong about the first part. You did buy my time. You bought my performance. You bought safety I could not afford. That beginning does not become romantic because we learned to make soup. His face tightened, but he did not defend himself. That mattered. I am also afraid that leaving now would be another kind of performance, I continued. Proof for an imaginary court that I was never touched by the bargain, that I can walk away from someone I love because freedom must look lonely to count. The room went still around the word love. Teo's face lost its remaining armor by fractions. "Someone you love," he said. "Yes." My voice steadied because the truth had finally stopped fighting me. "I love you. Not cleanly, not simply, not in a way that erases the contract. I love you with the contract remembered. I love you because you made the exit real before asking me to stay, because you ask at doors, because you learned that belonging can mean making room instead of laying claim, because you eat burnt eggs when a broken friend needs evidence that his effort matters, because you keep your mother's recipes beside my ugly tiger, because when you have power, you are trying to decide where not to put it. Tae stood very still. Then he lowered his head, not dramatically, but as if the words had weight and he needed a second to carry them correctly. I love you, he said. I have loved you badly in some ways, carefully in others, silently too long. I love you enough to want you beyond my reach if that is where you are safest. I love you enough to hope it is here. I crossed the room then, slowly because choice deserved time to be seen. He did not move until I touched his sleeve. May I? He asked, voice roughened. Yes. His arms came around me with restraint at first, then closer when I held him back. His face turned into my hair. I felt him breathe like someone learning the shape of relief. It was not a tidy ending. Nothing real is. We still had the contract. We still had history. We still had a family empire full of knives disguised as paperwork. But in that room, the pretense broke, and neither of us tried to repair it. Our first true kiss came minutes later, because I lifted my face and asked him with my eyes like a coward, and he, annoyingly respectful, said, "Use words." "Kiss me," I said. "Please." He did. Gently, then with a contained hunger that made sense of months of restraint without turning it into conquest. His hand stayed at my back, familiar, and changed. There was no audience, no strategy, no need to appear convincing. Only the warm press of his mouth, the faint taste of tea, the way his breath trembled once when I touched his jaw. I had been kissed before by men who assumed an Omega's yielding was proof of permission. Tae kissed like permission was a living thing he had been trusted to hold. Later, much later, when the house was dark and the city beyond the windows had softened to scattered lights, we went to his room because I asked to. Our intimacy unfolded with the same careful honesty that had brought us there. No grand performance, no urgency to prove what love had already said. He asked. I answered. We laughed once when I complained that his bed was too formally made for human use, and he said, very seriously, that he would speak to Mrs. Na about reducing symmetry. The rest I keep private, not because it was shameful, but because some tenderness loses truth when displayed like evidence. I will say only that it felt like arriving in a room I had helped build without noticing, and finding the light already on. In the morning, he woke before me but did not move, one arm warm around my waist, eyes open to the ceiling. Regret? I asked. He turned his head. No. Fear? Yes. Good. I'd hate to be alone with it. His thumb moved over my wrist. Stay today? I have breakfast service. After. Yes, after. The legal contract ended in March. We did not renew it. We replaced it with a shorter document dissolving the performance clauses, confirming asset transfers, and leaving the marriage intact by mutual choice. Attorney Han looked at us over the papers with the weary satisfaction of someone who had spent a year watching two idiots walk slowly toward the obvious while billing hourly. Congratulations, she said dryly, on administrative clarity. Minjun cried when I told him, then accused me of causing emotional inconvenience during his healing era. He had not gone back to Xionghuan. He was working at a new bar, attending counseling, and learning that loneliness did not require immediate decoration. Jian pretended she had predicted everything from the start and demanded a family dinner. Mrs. Na made too much food. Ma labeled leftovers. Professor slept on Tae's coat and refused to apologize. Our resolution was not a clean bow tied around a dangerous life. Tae remained who he was, An alpha with power, a man shaped by grief, heir to an empire still being dragged towards something less cruel, one decision at a time. I remained myself, Omega, cafe owner, brother, friend, man who still compared cabbage prices and believed soup could reveal moral weakness. We argued. He overprotected. I underreported exhaustion. He tried to solve things with infrastructure. I threatened to replace his study chair with something upholstered in cheerful yellow. He learned to ask, "Do you want help or listening?" I learned to answer honestly instead of testing whether he would guess. The recipe box stayed on the shelf beside my mother's brass spoon and the ugly tiger. Sometimes Teo and I made his mother's soup, still too peppery, and ate it at the kitchen table after midnight. Sometimes he came to the cafe before opening and sliced radish, still too thick unless supervised. Customers eventually stopped whispering about the severe man in the corner because he learned to carry trays, and because aunties forgive many things when a handsome alpha refills water without being asked. One spring morning, almost a year after the auction, where I first took his arm for money, I opened the cafe at 7 and found Teo outside, holding 2 bags of cucumbers from the market. "These are better," he said. "Good morning to you too." "Good morning." "Did you intimidate the vendor?" I negotiated. "Did he sweat?" "Moderately." "Teo." I paid full price. I took the bags, inspected the cucumbers, and found them excellent. Acceptable. He looked pleased in the smallest possible way. This was not the life I had imagined before debt narrowed my choices. It was not clean of compromise or shadow, but it was mine in the ways that mattered, chosen again each morning in small acts. A door opened, a question asked, a bowl placed before someone hungry. Teo followed me inside, removed his coat, rolled his sleeves, and took the knife from the rack after I nodded permission. "Thin slices," I said. "I know." "You always say that before cutting them too thick." "Then supervise me." I stood beside him, close enough for our shoulders to touch, and watched his careful hands begin. Outside, Seoul kept moving, indifferent and alive. Inside, the first pot of broth warmed on the stove, the duck sponge watched from its post, and my husband, no longer fake in any room that mattered, sliced radish with the grave attention of a man who had finally learned that belonging was not possession, but a place made and remade by choice.